I am very, very pleased to introduce today Mark Verber, who is a licensed professional counselor, owner of Epic Counseling Solutions in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. He was recognized by Harrisburg Magazine in 2021 as simply the best therapist. Wow, what a label. He responded to my series asking marriage counselors to list 5 keys to a happy, lasting marriage. And his response was published recently in Authority magazine. I found your article so packed full of wisdom that it was kind of hard to pick out things I wanted to talk to you about this morning. But first of all, EPIC is capitalized. I'm wondering if it's an acronym for anything.
It is, yes. It stands for empathy, perseverance, insight, and collaboration. So that's kind of how we characterize our commitment to the people that we work with, the people seeking our care. We want to provide all those things as part of their journey.
I went to your website this morning and looked around, and you have a lot of resources listed on your website, including online sessions, a free first session, but also a lot of other links to sources for when people are looking for help in a lot of different areas. I was very impressed with the breadth of your website. Our first relationship teachers are our parents,
Yes,
and you speak very highly of them. So tell me
they've
what,
earned it.
pardon?
I said they've earned that.
They've earned it. Well, tell us how they earned it.
Yeah, I mean, I once heard it put, and I think it really applies to my situation, that I won the parental lottery, because it's one thing that we really have the least control over. We can't pick our parents. We're born into these situations. And the older I get, the more that I appreciate and recognize how lucky I've been, how lucky my brothers and I are to have the parents that we have. And they're just, really, their number one priority has always been, family. They've done a lot of things outside of that, a lot of accomplishments that I think are just really remarkable in and of themselves. But it always has come back to ways to support the family. And as one of their sons, I really benefited from that many times throughout my life. I still do, both at points where I've really been had the opportunity to be successful, and they've been there and been a big part of that. But also certainly at times where I've struggled, and they've been always people that I can count on, without question, and in ways that they've always gone above and beyond. So really, really fortunate to have them as my parents, and I appreciate it more than ever.
What qualities did you see that you want to emulate in your own marriage?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, just a sense of commitment to each other, a sense of commitment to the family, and really doing whatever it takes to follow through on those commitments. I think one of the most difficult things that I've learned the older you get, the more complicated your life gets, is
Yes.
that in many wonderful ways, you have lots of opportunities to do different things and to pursue different passions and so forth. And the challenging part of that is choosing which to pursue, because uh, one of my quotes in the article that I appreciate from Ray Dalio is that you basically can do almost anything you want in life, but you can't do everything you want in life. So
Yes.
that involves making choices. And so reflecting back on my parents, it feels even more. The older I get, looking back, their choices have always been to support the family, to support each other. Through that, they've shown strength and perseverance. They've also showed compassion and caring, to really kind of support their kids in any way that they can. Me and my brother, I have two brothers. We're all very different. And I think my parents have done an excellent job of being able to support us in different ways to allow us each to be successful in our own ways. And I think that can be a difficult thing for certain parents to do.
So they didn't expect their children to turn out as cookie cutter models of
Right.
themselves. They really
Right.
celebrate your differences.
Absolutely. They definitely had expectations, but for us to be successful, for us to fulfill our potential, and they always met us there. They always, did what it took to help us, meet those expectations. But those expectations weren't specific in terms of what path we took, and what that looked like.
That's awesome. And it seems, at least in my experience with the people I know and the clients I have, that it's pretty rare for a person to say they won the parent lottery.
I agree, and I think it's one of those things that it has taken time for me to appreciate that that is the case.
Yes.
And it's really one of those things that's not just through my own reflection, but people who meet my parents, people who know my parents, always share those same sentiments that even if they're not their parents, what great people they are, and they've always demonstrated that by being supportive to other people. There's been several times that they've friends who are going through a difficult time, they've been supportive of them, including allowing them to, live in our home for months at a time, and things like that. So it has started with us, but it really extends beyond that, to other people in our lives, and then certainly in the community. They've both been very involved in the community and done things to support, community efforts as well.
So it boils down to their basic character is
Mhm.
one of generosity and compassion and support and so forth, that was modeled for you, not only personally, but watching them, how they interact in the community. That's awesome.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm very grateful, for all they've done, not just for me, but the community as a whole, and other people we care about.
What are some misperceptions about marriage that make it hard for couples, your clients, some of my clients, to do the work needed to
Mhm.
create and sustain a happy marriage?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's definitely some common themes that come up, and it always really centers around this idea that because it's love, because there's this kind of intoxicating magic to it in the beginning, that it should always be that way.
Yeah.
That it should be just so easy. And then once we start to have challenges, because every relationship has its own challenges, um, there's not just the fact that they have to face those challenges. There becomes this extra layer where it's like, well, we shouldn't even have these challenges. It should be so easy. It was easy 2 years ago. It was easy in the beginning. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with us? So the fact that it should be easy is a misconception. The fact that actually it should get easier is a misconception. And certainly the fact that because we love each other, that love is enough. And for people who do this work, you learn very quickly that it's going to take more than love. Love is a great center, and a core foundation to build off of, but it does take work. That was the phrase, what gets in the way of doing the work, and
Right.
it's those things, those misconceptions of that it shouldn't be work. But once they realize, wait a minute, this is work, and it's really ultimately the most important work we'll ever do, then they'll do it. They'll buy in and do what it takes in almost every case. So it's kind of getting them to flip that switch in that way is really important.
Herbal Hendricks, in his imago therapy work, mentions that conflict is the second segment of every marriage,
Hmm.
that we can't avoid conflict. It's part of the calling that we have to do our personal work.
Right.
And so many people think the partner should do the work, the changing,
Right.
not me. I'm okay.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. The the beauty and challenge of relationships is that you have, in most relationships, two people. Two
Yes,
people bought in. And the challenge of that is that when things go wrong, the logical response is it must be that other person.
yes, right.
And that's just the way that we look at it. And what's wrong with you? If you would just do more of this or less of this, then we wouldn't be having this problem. But if we get stuck in that pattern, we'll never get anywhere. But if we can buy into the fact that the opportunity is that we actually do have two people and we both work to change that dynamic, then it makes it that much easier. And you mentioned, Harville Hendricks. I love Esther Perel's quote that, it takes two people to create a pattern, but only one person to break it.
Oh,
And I think,
I'm so glad you said that. That
yes,
was going to be my next question. Go
yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, so I think when we look at that, what an opportunity that instead of thinking, if my partner would only change, this would be different. If we look at it as, wow, if I change, not only will I bring something else to the relationship will change and my partner will start to respond in more positive ways.
Have you had clients where you've observed that happening, where maybe one takes the lead and their
Mhm.
willingness to make changes and it transforms the whole dynamic?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's what we're when a couple comes in, the part of a marriage counselor's role is to really kind of connect with each person, develop that
Mhm.
relationship as ways to help create leverage for them to help change the dynamic between them. And
Yes,
so, in some ways, it can be difficult because if you have a resistant person, sometimes no matter what the other person does, it's not going to change. But I think in most cases, it's really an opportunity because if I can just get a foothold with one of them, just to
yes,
start, and they start to do just a little bit, then sometimes even without the other partner's awareness, they start to
yes.
change because they start feeding into the dynamic and the cycle in a different way, and it just kind of creates space for them to grow into, and then it can really have significant changes over the long run.
I'm really glad that you brought that up and that you've had that experience as well.
Yes.
You, uh, do you or let me see how to say this. I find with some of my clients that there's so much resistance to
Mhm.
change.
Yeah.
Do you identify certain reasons for that or causes that have to be addressed?
Yeah, and I think there are a number of different reasons, but I think the biggest is that change can be really scary. It's almost kind of like even if we're not exactly where we want to be, it's the devil we know, so to speak. That like I at least kind of have my footing within this dynamic, and the fact is, change is not only scary, but it involves the unknown. We don't know exactly how it's going to change and how things will evolve when we start to make those changes. But I think also, there's just this element that, if I change and then it doesn't work, what
Mhm.
then?
Yeah.
What if we don't get results? Then are we really in trouble? Almost kind of like hedging our bets a little bit, at times. But I also think that, sometimes people feel that, you know, we might not be where we want to be, but I'm not just comfortable with this, but I know what I'm doing in this dynamic. We might argue every night about the dishes, but then I know we're going to go to bed, and then tomorrow it's going to be the same thing, and so forth. I don't like it. But if you start to talk about, how can we take a different approach to this, and what might that look like, then it starts to say, well, what if I then have to take out the trash more, or do this or that. It's just kind of can create open, I think, in their minds, this Pandora's box of what does that lead to.
I found that so many of my clients come from homes that were either divorced parents or fighting parents or they've had several relationships fail in their past, that they're almost afraid to believe that a great marriage is even possible. So why should I work at it?
Right. Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think, you talked about kind of the models that they come from. That's another big part of it is that, it's somewhat of a cliche, but holds true so often. And you mentioned Harville Hendricks. He certainly talks about this a lot, that, we are drawn to images of the models that we saw growing up, even if they're not positive models.
Yes.
So, people find themselves in relationships and, oh, geez, they're just like my father. They get angry very quickly and they yell a lot. But yet, every relationship they've been in, it seems to be that same pattern because that's what they associate with love. And to try to disrupt that can be daunting, and difficult at times.
I've also found that couples can learn new skills and practice them and are so excited about the results they get, but 6 months later, they've drifted back into their old patterns, so they get the same old results.
Yeah.
It requires almost an up level in your belief to live with a happy, loving marriage when that hasn't been your model in the past.
Right.
My late husband and I did an awesome job of learning new skills and
Mhm.
practicing new skills, and we're so excited with the peace that we were experiencing in our relationship. And yet I found myself feeling anxious. And
Mm.
it took a couple months for me to identify that I knew how to be in a fighting marriage. I
Right.
didn't know how to relax into a happy, loving
Mm.
marriage. And I had to change my image of myself, my image of our marriage, in order to go on relaxing into this happy, loving marriage that we create.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's such a good point. I think your personal experience is so valuable in it and explaining that. And I think, I think one of the biggest knocks against marriage counseling, and I think it's a very legitimate one, is that even if you get results, they don't tend to sustain over time, or that could be the real challenge.
Yes,
And I think there's, a lot of legitimacy to that. And I would suggest that it's not just with marriage counseling. Uh, Ask anybody who's ever tried to lose weight and been on a diet and been successful and had trouble sustaining that, or quitting smoking, or changing the way they go about spending. I think that's just life in general.
yes,
It can be more difficult to kind of sustain, but I think with couples, for the very same reasons that you mentioned, that's a big part of it. That so much of what happens in relationships happens beyond our conscious awareness.
yes,
Right? Some of those kind of just um, really kind of deep ingrained patterns of seeking safety and reassurance, and what it takes to find that in the environment, even if it's lashing out or withdrawing. And so to really make those changes on a deeper level, I think it certainly involves couples doing the work, but also I think part of our goal with working with couples should be empowering them not just with the tools to make the change, but the tools to repair when they do get off track down the line. That's one of the things that I kind of mentioned in the article that I think fits into the category of what I call bowling with bumpers.
yes,
Really finding ways to kind of put in these bumpers, so that when you do miss the mark, because you will miss the mark, we have an ability to kind of bounce back without landing in the gutter. That we can, kind of create some cushion and know that it's going to happen. It's how we respond when it does. And I think really kind of doing what it takes to kind of dig back in, whether it's returning for a tune up to
yes,
marriage counseling, or falling back on your skills and say, you know what, we need to start doing our check-ins more often. We need
yes.
to start being more intentional with things like our imago dialogue, or, things like that along the way that worked in the past and kind of we've gotten away from because it felt like maybe we didn't need them as much.
Our brains are so addicted to habits, and it's hard to
Mhm.
maintain a new habit or a new practice long enough that it becomes a habit.
Exactly.
And Jim and I were really fortunate that we were both so committed, in our case, to maintain respect 24/7, to always
Mhm.
treat each other with respect, which meant that we did the communication skills, we did the anger management
Right.
skills that we learned, so that we were able to maintain the peaceful, loving relationship we
Yeah.
created until it finally became a habit.
Yeah.
You said that underneath any surface conflict is a more fundamental
Mhm.
issue. What is that?
Yeah, I think I put it as just kind of a sense of disconnection and disregard.
Yes,
Certainly couples come in and they're fighting over finances or sex or household chores or things like that. And those are legit. It is legitimate. You have to kind of deal with that. But usually underneath of that, there's that kind of deeper sense of that they're just kind of disconnected. We're not aligned with one another, and we're not kind of attuning in the way that we really need to. And as part of that, either as a contributing factor or as a resulting one, there begin to be this kind of disregard for one another, where we're no longer listening in the same way. We're not being as responsive as we were in the past, and we begin to fall into these patterns that just perpetuate that disconnection. Either again shutting down and withdrawing, retaliating, certainly trying to then kind of control our partners or things like that. Every couple kind of develops those types of patterns.
I've had clients say that when their partner is upset, it's the partner's problem, not theirs.
Right.
You say that when your partner's upset, it should be your number one priority. Why?
Yeah. I think number one, as a way to be compassionate and supportive to your partner. You use the phrase in your and describing what you committed to in your own marriage, committing to a sense of respect for one another, even when you disagree, even when they're upset. I think that's really important. But I would also put it to people because I think sometimes people are most motivated by self-interest. What I would suggest to people who might say that, well, that's really their problem, they're upset, is number one, yes, it's important for you to be supportive of them, but this is also a strategy that will help you. If
Yes.
you attend to the fact that they're upset in a really effective and appropriate way, they're not going to be as upset as long. They're going to be more responsive to you. And the things that you are frustrated about, the things that you really want that you're not getting, this is the pathway of doing that. This is what it's going to take. And when we start doing these things, and then you both start doing that for one another, imagine where we'll be. So I think it works both ways.
It becomes reciprocal.
Absolutely.
That's why it's in your own best interest to be attentive to your partner. You viewed, I love your analogy of viewing conversation as a game of catch.
Mm-hmm.
You said secure the ball before throwing it back. Tell me
Right.
what securing the ball looks like.
Yes. So when conflict goes poorly, what tends to happen is that even if it starts off going okay, all right, we're listening and we're responding, that when we start to get a sense that maybe our partner isn't getting it, or they're not being as compassionate, or instead of listening, they're just trying to fix, we get more frustrated. When we get more frustrated, what tends to happen is it speeds up. The whole dynamic just ramps up. And instead of being a good back and forth reciprocal, I like the word that you used, is really it just becomes a pinball, back and forth. And so what we want to do is be very intentional about slowing it down. And so when we view it as a game of catch and you say, what does it mean to secure the ball? Instead of just firing back a quick response, we're receiving it, we're considering it, we're taking a moment to catch our breath, pause, and then respond instead of just react. And when we do that, we really control what I call that kind of the velocity and the reciprocity of those conversations. And when we're able to manage that piece of it and slow things down, it's much more productive.
Do you teach your clients some form of active listening
Mm-hmm.
where they repeat back what the partner has said?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will often use the Imago dialogue, a version of that, which includes that, where you have one a sender and a receiver, one at a time, and you start by mirroring, just very much the fundamental of active listening, and then validating and empathizing. But I think that you know having a process and a structure, particularly when we're struggling, helps make the difficult more simpler, and more applicable, and couples can apply it. So anything we can do to really kind of take an imposed structure, I think can be helpful. And I think active listening or an Imago dialogue does a really good job of that.
When I teach my clients a form of that, they say it feels so mechanical because it is structured.
Right.
But they say the structure is designed like a seatbelt and shoulder harness. It keeps
Yes.
you safe.
I like that.
That's what structure does. It helps you both stay safe. So what do you love the most about what you do?
I consider myself so fortunate, that one of the things I say is I never have to look for inspiration in my job because it walks through the door every hour. I just love the fact that I'm in a position where people come to me, oftentimes at, if not the most difficult part of their lives, one of the most difficult, and I'm in an opportunity to develop a therapeutic relationship, support them through that, and ultimately help them realize the change that they're looking for. My job is never boring, and I just really feel like I get to see the best version of people, that their fear is that they're showing me their worst version. This is me when
Yes,
I'm really struggling.
yes.
And I feel by them being able to be vulnerable and come in and confront these things, that I see that best version, and to see them be able to make the change, oftentimes within the moment, within the session, to
Yes.
be able to feel lighter, to be able to feel more confident, to be able to show more eye contact, and just be able to walk out the door with a plan and a greater sense of purpose. I can't imagine a job I'd like more, feel more
It takes
appreciative
so
of.
much courage for a client to walk through our doors, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
That's one of the things I acknowledge right off the bat is that I appreciate the courage it takes to make the call and say, we need help. You know,
Absolutely. So many people don't do it, and that's not a criticism. I understand that some of the barriers to doing it, but for those that do, I never want to take that for granted, that they're doing something very difficult, putting themselves in a very vulnerable position, and I want to kind of honor that and validate it.
you mentioned near the end of your article that you'd like to start a movement that
Mhm.
made marriage counseling more accessible, more comfortable, like an ordinary thing, rather
Yeah.
than this big barrier that we have to get over in order to step in the door. What would happen if well, I had an appointment with Yitzi Weiner, the editor of Authority Magazine, and he suggested the possibility of creating like a giant roundtable of marriage therapists who joined together to brainstorm, how can we make this more
Oh,
comfortable, you know?
yeah. Oh, I mean, it's such a wonderful idea. I would love to be a part of it. And I think the reality is that marriage is difficult. We know that. Yet there are resources. There's so much we can do
Mhm.
to help. And I think it is such a shame. I think I kind of referenced in the article that if someone were to have a brain aneurysm,
Yes,
we all would know exactly what to do. You would go to this doctor, take this approach, and so forth.
yes,
Wouldn't blame them. There wouldn't be any hesitation about doing that.
yes,
And I would love to see marriage counseling handled in the same way. And I also, made the comparison that, how is it really any different than someone going to the gym?
right.
That they're going to help improve themselves or rehab from an injury or even reach their peak performance in a way they never have. And they're posting, gym selfies about that. Why shouldn't we do that for marriage counseling? Why shouldn't we have those kind of therapy selfies from the waiting room that this
Yes.
is what I'm doing and I'm proud of doing it and I'm trying to kind of improve?
Well, we share that desire, that goal. Maybe someday we'll be on a team that is able to make that happen.
I look forward to it.
What is your most difficult challenge as a marriage therapist?
Hmm. That's a really great question, and I think for me, I think it is as much as you generally do see great results. I think it can be really challenging when at least your own perception is you're not seeing the results that you want.
Yes,
People are showing courage to come. They are being vulnerable, and they're putting in the work, and they're just not been able to kind of make that turn yet or see those results. And that's really difficult. And I think the reality is that it you begin to question, is there something else I should be doing, which is
right.
a healthy thing. But I think sometimes it's just you haven't seen the results yet, or sometimes that there are things that are beyond our control or their control that are contributing factors, and but it's just really difficult. You want to be able to see the results. I think I kind of referenced in the article. If I was a carpenter, every day I showed up, I would see I built this wall, I built that room, that so forth, and you just don't see that. It's just
Mhm.
not the same. But I think ultimately the results that you can see and the change that you can make, oftentimes that happens outside of the sessions, long since they're gone, is so much more rewarding. But it can be challenging.
I tell my clients that the real work happens at home. You know,
Absolutely.
I don't have a magic wand in this session. I can, coach you to learn and practice some things, but the real work happens at home. I chuckled when you said it's easy to practice what you preach unless you're not tired, stressed, distracted, overwhelmed, conflicted, or emotional. So, how do you manage yourself when you are any of those things at home?
I as well as I can under the circumstances. But yeah, we're all human, and those
Mhm.
things are going to happen. And I think the biggest thing, I think, is trying to develop an awareness and recognize when those things are happening, and using that awareness to say that maybe this isn't the best time to have this conversation. Can we circle back later? Or to be proactive and recognize that maybe I shouldn't bring this up if I'm kind of already stressed or something. So I think regulating we want to regulate ourselves as much as possible, but outside of that, I think where we have the most leverage sometimes is regulating the circumstances and the situation to set ourselves up for success.
Choosing the best time to have a difficult conversation is such an important skill, rather
Absolutely.
than just blurting out whatever's on my mind at any given time. How do you prioritize time with your wife for your own marriage?
Yeah, and I think that's I certainly touched on that in my five keys. It really is
Mhm.
the most important thing. And we have a young son at home, and so there's a lot that can get in the way of that. And I think it starts by prioritizing at least some time each day to kind of connect, download, our days, share how our days went. We always eat dinner together every day, which is kind of an important time to do that. And then I think it's really just about, you know, prioritizing time together comes from not just being able to do that, but being able to communicate about how and when we can do that, being able to have difficult conversations, as part of that. So there aren't underlying things that are getting in the way or causing, avoidance. So I think there's a lot of little things that go into it. But it starts as just committing to the fact, kind of going back to what my parents demonstrated,
Yeah.
committing to the fact that this is the most important thing. And these other things that I do are ways to support that. They might look separate. If I'm writing an article for work or, really committed to that, that's great. But that's all ways to support my profession, which ultimately helps support the family and supports each other. So it's a balance, but I think you have to keep coming back to what's most important right at the center of it.
Yitzi Weiner said that the business is to support the family, not the
Right.
other way around.
That's a great way to put it.
And I've also got a series running for power couples who work together and have a successful marriage. Every one of them talks about non-negotiable time together.
Yeah.
One couple said there's 20 minutes every day that is non-negotiable. They spend it catching up with each other. And you mentioned, it isn't enough to try to catch up on the weekends. You need
Yeah.
daily time
Yep.
to connect with each other. How do you prioritize your time as a dad?
Yeah. I mean, that is something that is just there's no job I could ever have that's more important than that job of being a dad. I mean, I think my relationship with my wife is incredibly important, but when it talks about a role that I have, nothing is more important than that. And I can think I mentioned in the article that it struck me when our son was born that, having a child really broadens your perspective, but narrows your purpose. There's
Yes.
so many other things you have to consider now that you have a child, but really what your purpose is in order to kind of support and protect your child. I think that's at the top of the list. And so for me, it's having time each day. I take them to daycare each day, so that's special time that I have and enjoy of being able to kind of just have that time in the car and drop them off. And then when I come home from work, there really is no feeling like having him kind of run up to me and jump into my arms. So try to make the most of any time that I have, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
I love that I'd never heard this thought before, that when you give birth to a child, three new people are brought into the marriage. It's
Yeah,
not just that the child is a new person, it's that you as a mom and dad are new. And that's why, you know, having a child is for many of us anyway, such a wonderful experience, but it also adds a great deal more stress to the
no question,
relationship.
no question. And that was for as long as I've done this work and worked with countless couples about the challenges of being a parent and the joys of it.
Yes,
It certainly can't prepare you for having going through your experience yourself.
Yes.
And I absolutely kind of came to that conclusion that it's so transformational that it's not just bringing one new person in the home, it's three. And so you're learning to kind of rebalance those relationships and to find your footing as an individual as part of this larger family. And it's not an easy thing to do, and it's not a static challenge. Each day, as your child grows, and each week it becomes different, and you need to kind of constantly be able to evolve to support the situation.
I think you become a different parent when your child is an adolescent, and then you become a different parent when they enter adulthood. And being the parent of an adult child is a very different role than being the parent of a toddler.
No question. Yeah.
So what do you think your wife would name as the quality she loves the most about you?
Oh. um, I should have her here on phone a friend. No, I think that she would say that I am family oriented, that I am generous, that I am supportive.
Mhm.
Um, I think that she would say that I'm funny probably half the time, but
Mhm.
think I'm funny all the time. So,
Of course. What do you appreciate the most about your wife?
wow. I mean, my wife is just incredibly dedicated to not just our relationship, but certainly, our son and our family.
Mhm.
Extremely hard worker, just really can kind of willing to do it all in order to do what it takes. And I really appreciate that. She's a wonderful mother, very loving and dedicated mother. And I think I referenced this in the article, but her and I, we went through quite the challenge of infertility for a number of years, and have been very fortunate that it ultimately was successful. But seeing her go through that challenge and just being totally um, undeterred and steadfast to do whatever it takes, and it's quite a lot for anybody who has been through IVF on a physical and emotional level. And it didn't matter. She There was nothing that was gonna stop her or stop us from doing that. And I'm grateful for her, and that really highlighted those qualities that I appreciate so much about her.
That's beautiful to hear. How will you measure your success as a father?
Well, I think it starts by something we just talked about: time. There is no substitute for spending time, with your child. And I think beyond that, it's what not it's not about what I'm trying to tell him or even teach him. What can I model? That's so much more effective. How can I model for him, not just the type of relationship I want him to see he and I to have, but how can I model for him the type of relationship I want him to see between him and his mother, my wife and I, to be able to do that, to be able to treat other people well, to be able to see him to see me treat other people well that are in no position to help me. Just whether it's the waiter at a restaurant or things like that. I think it's so important to demonstrate what you want to see from your kids, not just tell them.
I appreciate that answer very much. And as your son grows, I'm sure he'll appreciate that as
I
well.
hope so.
Um, I'm so grateful to get to further interview you today, and thank you for your transparency and the
Of course.
wisdom of all of your answers. If any of you watching this video are interested, you can reach Mark at info@epiccounseling.com. That's an email address. Or you can go to the website epicsolutions.com, where there's a lot of resources listed in addition to online services. I hope you'll go to Authority Magazine and read the full article. There were so many wise tips in that article that I think you would find valuable. Mark, thank you for allowing me the privilege of this further interview this
Mm.
morning. It will be linked to the article at Authority Magazine and also published on Medium as a blog post. So thank you so much. I
Oh,
love your work. I hope that we get to connect
uh,
further sometime in the future.
oh, well, thank you, Nancy. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you taking the time and including me in this series. And I could tell when I read the questions that it was someone who was really experienced in this work. They were so well written and thought provoking questions that I found it very helpful to reflect on those things. And I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We'll see each other again, I hope. And just again, I appreciate your work and want to support you in any way that I can.
Thank you so much, Nancy.
Bye bye for now.
All right, take care.